Okay, hi, my name is Matt Abedi. I was a performer at the Magnet Theater for 10 years, and this is my YouTube channel. Um, Today's video is about game. Um, this will be the first video of like a series. I kind of spent today mapping out like this will probably be a 10 video series. So this will be like an intro, and it'll be kind of the first type that I think is the most famous way of approaching game. But so in this video, I'll kind of talk a little bit about my general thoughts about game before we dive in. Um, I think one hot take that I have here is that like a lot of people try to think about game as like, oh, there's game improv and then there's non-game improv. And I think the reality of it is what you actually have is um, different styles have different emphasis on different components, and it yields like a different balance. Um, the sharpest one is like if you go to Chicago and you see improv, you'll be like, this feels slower. At least that was my impression when I went to Chicago to see improv. Feels slower, feels more theatrical, feels more like you know wait and see. Where like going to UCBLA or UCB New York, it really did feel a lot more like people chasing after a moment and trying to hit it with as much precision as possible. But it doesn't mean that there is no game in the Chicago style stuff, because Chicago style stuff utilizes a lot of game, even if it feels a little understated. And on the UCB theater, if you don't have those like kind of acting chops, you don't have like the grounded reality and whatnot, the unusual thing doesn't pop, and so you don't have anything that you're really playing. It doesn't work. So that's like my first thing is like game is kind of universal. um Second thing that I'll mention before we really get into it is that's my like kind of other big thing about game is like I think game is taught um either really like mystically or it's taught in a mechanical way that makes a lot of like students feel like, well, I did all the mechanical stuff and it's not working. So the mystical version of it is there are techniques, but you ultimately still have to be funny. And I think I'll say this: these two components, these two are like basically the same thing, which is like uh, um, one way that you hear a lot of game pushed as is like, give me who, what, where, base reality. And now that we have the base reality, show me what's like odd, give me an unusual moment and let's play the unusual moment. And we'll use like these kinds of techniques, which we'll talk about later on, to make it happen. But I think the reality of it is that like you can do all of those things. Who, what, where. You can use justification. Something odd happens, I explain it. And still not produce anything that like is funny. Um, those are necessary, but they aren't always enough. And I also want to say that like um because we've justified an odd behavior doesn't mean that that is the only kind of game that there is, that like every odd thing, once it has justification, then produces laughs. It's just one technique. And so the purpose of the series is going to be to talk about lots of different techniques, lots of different avenues to game across several theaters that I've studied at. And like I think sometimes you'll run into like someone at a theater and they'll just try to explain all these other approaches to game with their approach. That just isn't helpful to me. What I think is helpful or more helpful is not to say that like if you follow these techniques you will produce a funny idea, but rather that these are some guidelines for approaching a funny thing, or as you are trying to come up with funny ideas in a scene when you're sketch writing, when you're character writing, or whatever, that these techniques will help you see reality in a way that will make comedy easier on you. I'm going to go on. This is a little like, this is a tiny bit of side salad, but I think it's really important to how I'm thinking about game and how I think it's valuable to think about game. That might be helpful. There is like I can't tell if it's like I can't remember if it was an interview or a speech or whatever, but David Lynch is talking about creativity. David Lynch, famous movie director, right? Mulholland Drive and so Blue Velvet or whatever, so on and so forth. So they're asking about how a creative person comes up with ideas, and he basically says that the creative person isn't like inventing ideas out of thin air. What's actually happened is like a creative person has a particular way of looking at the world, and because of their particular way of looking at the world, they can see their art in the world. So have you ever seen like a director do this sort of thing? The idea here is, right, like, the reality that I'm experiencing, let me quickly put like a frame around it. Okay. Another thing that comes to mind is like a friend of mine who is an artist. She took this photo of a street sign that was like, I think the street sign was like "this way only" or something like, and the sign was like one way only or only one way. I don't know, whatever the sign says, right? And the sign, that's normally like horizontal had broken and it was turning vertically, it pointed to the sky, right? And she took a photo, and there she has like a little bit of a mystical, like spiritual edge to her, and to see that sign pointing there's only one way or one way and it pointing to the sky, for her naturally meant something a little bit more. And the photo kind of has this like that's what's like kind of interesting and fun and nice about it. But if we didn't have that lens, that spiritual lens, or that lens that says like there are these coincidences that tell us something greater, or these funny little moments that are like optimistic and positive or whatever, if we don't have that lens on, then we might just walk past that sign. And indeed, right, millions and millions of people walk past that sign and probably didn't have that same idea, but my friend did. So in comedy, what we're trying to do is become really sharp about looking at reality through a particular lens, and game and learning game and the different ways of understanding game, which I want to cover, help you look at reality and process it. And whenever you process it through that lens, find humor, because you're seeing the same thing everybody else sees, but with a little your own little edge to it, your own little poetry to it. Another example of this that was given to me by one of my favorite improvisers and improv coaches, Stefan Schutt. If you ever get to work with him, I think he's still very active, and I think he's in Los Angeles. Is this example of like people were asked to count the number of rebounds in a basketball game as a part of a study, and unbeknownst to them, partway through, a person in a full body gorilla costume just like runs in and out of frame, and after the study, they were asked, hey, by the way, how many rebounds did you count? They, said, this is the number of rebounds. And they were like, did you notice anything bizarre? And all of those people were like, no, or many of them, most of them said no. And so the point there being that like, whenever we are trained in on and focused on and have practiced and rehearsed and made our minds sharp to very specific kinds of possibilities, whenever we're living our lives, we'll have an easier time running into funny ideas. And doing improv is living your life on stage, is sort of like pretending to live life on stage. So if game, especially the first kind of game that we're going to work on, feels confusing or strange or odd or difficult to you, just understand you're developing what I call the net of consciousness. Your brain think of it as a net that, is pulled through the ocean, and it's catching fish, these specific ideas. And you are slowly making your mind a very specific kind of net that catches comedy fish. So that's my kind of philosophy on game. And so the video series will be focused in on, so far it's a list of 10, but yeah, 10 different ways of looking at game. And what I'm going to do in each one of these videos is I'm going to show you kind of, or talk you through how inside of an improv scene you can kind of bring those games to life, or at least have your mind and your ears open to those possibilities. I might talk you through a couple examples. I'll try my best to like think of like real examples, but I'm also trying not to like research too hard on these videos for now. But I'll talk you through some examples, and then I'll give you a couple warm-up ideas or exercises that you can do on your own or with your practice group, or that you can coach, that will help hone in on these techniques. So today we're going to be covering first unusual thing or framing. This is like kind of the UCB style of finding game. And I thought it would be like the best thing to do first, because I think when people are learning game, they usually learn UCB first. They usually read the UCB manual. I would say probably the UCB manual is the most read improv book outside of like the Del Close book, right? Truth and Comedy. And I think whenever people are going to do workshops and whatnot, like they learn game the most. And it's whenever I do workshops, it's the thing people ask the most about whenever they are into game and premise. So let's talk about that first. Okay. How the first unusual thing or framing or UCB style game kind of works. This is like the ground level 101 version of it. I'm sure I'm missing stuff from the book. You can read the book if you like. I think the book is like overly mechanical, but you're here for my opinion, and you can go to them for theirs, and you can always take classes there, which I highly recommend. I love my time at the UCB, and I would probably restart the program once I'm back in LA or New York. Okay, so here's how it works. The first thing we want to do is we want to play a faithful scene as best as we can, and along the way find a break or breaks to faithfulness to that scene, right? So what do I mean by that? And one place where I'm gonna like do a little hot take is like, I think base reality is very often taught as like, let's answer these 3 questions at the very, very top. Who are we? What are we doing? Where are we? And I think the problem with that method is that like in answering those 3 questions, we could come up with an unusual thing, right? Like we are 3 dentists at a dental office, putting each other under gas is like kind of odd, right? It's like we were all committing malpractice, but like this is how we get our rocks off. Maybe not a great scene, but like somewhere in the process we can create like a fish out of water scene, or produce something that's a little odd, right? Like, I am a yoga instructor. We are on a battlefield. We are fighting the Mujahideen. It's like, well, the odd thing is, why do we have a yoga instructor there, right? So whenever we're thinking about base reality, I think what the best thing to do is to think about an archetype scene. So what do I mean by an archetype scene? An archetype scene might be something like a boyfriend and a girlfriend, or 2 partners rather, breaking up with each other, right? So we know what the beats of a breakup scene are. So what does that look like? First is like, hey, setting the stage. We should sit here. I want to talk. 2 is right, the softening of the blow part. I think you're wonderful. The time together. I feel like we both are. 3rd phase is I'm gonna break the news. I don't think we should be together anymore. And then 4th phase is the fallout, right? So that is an archetypical scene. everyone kind of knows the contours of where that scene is going to go. Here's another archetypical scene. I am kind of an anxious man. I'm about to approach my girlfriend's father and ask if I could have her hand in marriage, right? Another example of this is like someone interviewing for a job. Let's think of one more scene. A teacher has to like break it to a student that they're going to have to come back over the summer because they failed their final, right? These are real scenes. They're all kind of monotone, like similar-ish scenes. They're all about news, but like two people getting married at an altar, two best friends packing for a road trip, or dealing or suddenly like their car breaks down, right? We know the beats of that scene. The beats of that scene are probably like the car breaks down, they step out, they maybe like flag somebody down, they pull out their tools, they investigate what the thing is, they might blame each other a little bit. We know what the beats of that scene look like. And so we want to play that scene as faithfully as possible, inside and out. And if you're having trouble thinking about archetypical scenes like I am right now, while you're watching TV, which I always like, if you're an improviser, if you're a comedian or whatever, watch tons of TV, watch tons of like, read lots of books, be involved in hearing stories constantly. And whenever you're watching any television or whatever, or theater, while you're watching it, kind of think of like, what is the archetype of the scene? What is happening in the scene? What is like, how is the scene similar to other scenes that you've seen like it? What are the beats of this scene, right? If I'm a human being who's just been abducted by aliens, what are the beats of that? The beats of it are probably like, I just landed in the aircraft, I'm kind of wondering where I am. Aliens explain to me that I've been abducted, and they maybe give me like, hey, this is why we're abducting you. This is what's going on, right? I have a reaction to that. Maybe I protest, maybe I'm excited, or whatever. And then the final beat of that is probably some resolution. Well, now that you're on the ship, this is what's going to happen. Okay? So these are archetypical scenes. And archetypical scenes will be really important later on when we talk about analogous scenes, because analogous scenes will tell us about like two scenes that mirror each other in a weird way, and having an understanding of the archetype will give you more game moves. I don't want to go too far into it now, but like whenever we talk about analogous, which I think is underdone in like most improv scenes because it feels hard and people don't like teach it. But I think knowing what the archetype of your scene is really important, right? I am a knight who shows up to the king and has news. That's an archetypical scene, right? It happens in a bunch of different stories. And there we just have hundreds of flavors of that story. There are hundreds of flavors of people being broken up with. There are hundreds of flavors of someone getting fired. There are hundreds of flavors of a friend who brings a new person as part of the group and nobody likes the new person, okay? There are no new stories. And the faster we can admit that, the faster we can say, like, our scene can look very similar to a scene somewhere else, but because we're going to be different people and we're going to act it differently, we're going to get a different result. And that is where we're going to find the second step. Second step is we are going to have something unusual happen, or something that doesn't feel appropriate to the archetype. So, two guys like break, the car breaks down or whatever. One of them panics and the other one goes like, you know what? Stuff like this always works out. And the other person goes like, that's a bizarre reaction to have. We're in the middle of the desert. We could die. We only have 1 hour's worth of supplies or food or whatever. And the other person goes like, yeah, I know, but I haven't died yet. I don't think it's ever going to happen to me ever again, right? Now, um, here's like a couple things. One is we want to test the waters, especially if we're dealing with like an audience that like isn't really giving like a fast response. Like big audiences, whenever you do something odd, the audience doesn't always have its ears up that like that's weird, right? In front of a small audience, the reaction of like we can't die, everything will be fine, will be like taken by most audiences like, all right, yeah, I can believe that. And the reason is whenever we're doing improv, we're kind of like always dealing with like how much the audience has suspended disbelief. And they're trying to figure out how much is real and how much is not real. A bigger audience will be pretty warm and they'll hear that and you might get a chuckle and you'll already be off to the races. So this is where step 2, we want to frame what's happening, but we don't necessarily immediately want to call to the audience's attention that we think it's funny. We just want to underline the idea. We just want to like take a little bit of a moment and like dig in a little bit further. So that we don't kind of tip our hand to the audience, right? We don't want to pass judgment. We don't want to say we don't think this is funny. We also don't want to say this is funny, you should be laughing. What we want to do is do a little bit of exploration so that we aren't like fully committed to making the idea happen, and we're inviting the audience to go like, do you see what I'm saying here? So what does this look like? It looks like first a pretty accurate description of what your read is on the other person's take. Whoever you think is unusual, you can go like, hey, it feels like you don't understand how precarious the situation is. It feels like you're not coming to grips with what's going on. Okay. And of course, the other person can do the same thing. In this scene where the two guys are broken down on a road trip, one of them is having a meltdown and one of them is very relaxed. And the person who's relaxed can, of course, immediately go like, you seem like you're taking this way too seriously. Now, the pitfall here is if we start arguing about reality. All right? Remember your yes and techniques. If someone says, we have 6 pounds of food and 100 MREs, and there's a car that blows by us every 10 minutes on this highway, guess who's weird? The person who's panicking that they're going to die on the side of the road. If we have no food, no water, and we just did nothing but eat 1 million saltine crackers at the salt factory, and we're thirsty, and we're 100 miles away from the last gas station or whatever, and this is a desolate island, guess who's weird? Okay? So framing is the opportunity where we can start to add those details and talk about what reality looks like. Who is really weird? Doesn't have to be that we're both opposites, right? If we did that same scene as peas in a pod, let's say there's no food, no water, we're in the middle of nowhere, blah, blah, blah. And both people are like, it's chill, we're good, we can't, like, everything will be fine. Their framing, the way that they can point out that they're playing a game, is to say most people, right? They would straight man or voice of reason themselves, right? Which is like, most people would freak out in a situation like this, but not us. We are cool as a cucumber in situations like this. And it's like, things just kind of work out for us, you know? So this framing is an opportunity to go like, I have an observation and I'm going to pile on facts to show you that the way that you're doing things is funny and is odd. Another example. I think this is a scene that I saw a while ago, but it was like a scene where someone's doing like brain surgery, and then the doctor just goes like, ice cream scoop, and the person goes like, ice cream scoop, right? And the doctor goes like, I am a Harvard School of Medicine. How dare you question my techniques or whatever? And what's it called? In that situation, right? Calling into question the expertise of the doctor. Okay, odd. right? But also, I think in this situation, right, the doctor needs to point out, sure, do I use things that are a little bit odd or outside of the norm for a brain surgeon? Yes, but I get results. Okay. In this situation, I would say there are like kind of two unusual things that work together. One is a nurse who is like kind of talking out of rank, like you shouldn't do that. But also, two, the other unusual thing is like this doctor who's like weirdly successful despite doing things that sound absolutely heinous. And probably the doctor using crazy tools is like the funnier part of it. But I think the other funny part of it would be like, nurse, please, please, please. I understand that you have misgivings, but I can't work under these conditions, right? So, in any case, notice how in this situation, right? Again, I framed what was going on, right? I'm a doctor. I have all of these credentials. I'm the head of my field. I blah 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 blah. I always get great results. So on and so forth. We have to yes all of those things, right? Whoever says the fact first gets the yes. And since we're now on the train that this doctor is actually a genius and whatever else, and blah 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 blah, guess who's weird? Okay, so this is how framing works. And I kind of want to recap it before we move on to the next stage, right? So framing is a strong description of what you're seeing, and a kind of accounting of facts that make that point of view strange or normal. You obviously can always take the normal route. You can always take the normal route, or you can pick the strange route. Up to you. Your scene partners and whoever you're working with should yes you to death. And by the way, this is the part where like people who are extremely focused on game struggle at jams, because if you frame something and the other person just like does not yes your framing into something that points out something absurd, you're kind of like, oh well, fuck my idea. And I would say you have to kind of roll with the punches, and be, that's why you have to have multiple tools in your toolbox whenever you're doing improv. Okay. Third step is we got to rest the game. Got to rest the game. What do we mean by rest the game? Many people say stop doing game moves. That's resting the game. Not exactly. What we have to do is go back to the archetype scene. And this is where those beats are really important. So car breaks down and immediately one guy freaks out and one guy is like super chill about it. Hey, another moment in our crazy adventure here on this planet Earth or whatever, right? That beat then moves into another beat, which is, hey, we got to flag somebody down. We got to call AAA. We got to look at the tools or whatever, right? We got to start problem solving, try to figure out what's going on. That's the second beat of our scene. In that second beat, then we're going to find new game moves, which is the new ways in which, one, the behavior of like, we're going to die on the side of the street, on the side of the road, and there's no way that we can die. I have the utmost confidence that we'll be saved. Plays itself out, right? So whenever someone is trying to flag people down, right? Right. The other person could be like, dude, can't jump around like that. Honestly, a good way to scare off people who are coming by and might help us. What you want to do is put up some cool guy vibes, really relax, and act like nothing's going wrong, because truth is, nothing's going wrong. Now, later on in that scene, we are going to move to the second beat, the next beat. Next beat might be someone pulls over, is trying to help you guys out. So how do these two characters now interact with this person? Okay. So resting the game is about returning to the normal progress of the scene and knowing that these two characters still have to play out the archetype of what's going on, right? So if we're breaking up with each other and we find out that someone had this absurd behavior in the relationship, we're going to have to move to the next phase, which is like breaking the news, right? So first thing might be like, look, I know we've been fighting a whole lot about your Pokemon collection and how I feel like it's become a little bit more important than me or whatever. And then when it comes to, hey, like, so that's why I'm breaking up with you. The next game move is like, this is about the Pokemon collection, right? And then maybe later on in the resolution, right, phase of that scene, we might have someone going like, this is why I like Pokemon. Okay. Pikachu's now going to break up with me. So this is why the archetype is really important. And that's what we mean by resting the game, is like, we just need to go back into the scene's normal pattern of movement and let bygones be bygones for a little bit of time. We just can't get stuck on the fact that these two people are different or that something odd has happened. The odd thing has to like set aside, right? Another way of thinking about this is like, whatever hot take or opinion you have, like, I have a friend who's really into like chi and energy, and I'm not that person. I'm really not. And every once in a while, he really loves to talk about like, oh, I just feel blocked and blah, 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 blah. And I love this guy to death. And sometimes I just kind of let him do his thing, you know? And I'll sometimes let him know like, you're talking to the wrong guy about it. But then I just move on to the next thing. And then, you know, a while later, right, he'll like bring it up again. And so that mimics real life a little bit more. And try to pay attention whenever you're kind of living your life. You'll just notice like your friends who have weird quirks aren't constantly talking about those weird quirks. They just kind of bubble up, and they bubble up whenever there's a new stimulus, whenever they're, you know, in a new environment, or they're confronted with a new set of facts, or you've started doing something new or moved on to another phase of your like dinner activity, conversation, whatever. And this thing comes back up again. Okay. So that's what we mean by resting the game. We mean, kind of agreeing to let, hey, you're odd, I'm odd, this odd thing happened, the world is odd, whatever, and we're gonna move on. Okay. Fourth thing, and this is kind of like a mix thing, is you have to trust that the opportunity to hit the same idea in new ways will arise, and that you don't need to look for it or find new game moves. It feels paradoxical. And sometimes I would say, like, look, if the scene is going on for a little bit, no one's hit the game or no one's found another game move, just find a game move, think of something, and just move on. Especially if you're doing a Herald, something where, you know, you've only got a couple minutes per scene. We don't have the luxury of just being on stage for long periods of time and hitting the game whenever we feel like it. But I would say trust that the difference in perspective, point of view, reaction, behavior that you're going to find whenever you frame something. Hey, seems like you're acting this way, or it seems like you believe this, or it seems like, you know, here's this accurate description of what I think is going on with you, socially, emotionally, or personally. And maybe I'll like do a little bit more of a deep dive on this right now, which is like, whenever I'm kind of like framing somebody, I usually want to find an emotion or reaction that they are having, or like a belief that I think that they have. You know, it seems like you hate our neighbors, right? It seems like you're afraid of rejection. It seems like you're a little too happy that Dave doesn't work here anymore, or whatever. These are observations about a person's state of mind, personality, opinions, philosophy, how they see the world. That is what we're talking about when we're talking about framing. I get the sense that you really care about this, right? I know this is very, very broad, but I typically want to break people out of the idea that a justification is like, I'm doing this because I believe blank. Well, yeah, fine. But like, it could also be just you're reacting this way. It could just be that like, you seem to always do this, right? So it doesn't have to be like, I do this because I believe blank. I think it is much simpler than that, which is like, you're the kind of person who does this, right? And if your scene partner is a great scene partner, or they like the game that you're putting up, or the character quirk that you're pointing out, they'll just say yes, right? Seems like you're picking your boogers whenever we're not looking around. Me picking the boogers? Hey, look over there. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Right. So we're just pointing out, observing a behavior, something about that character, a quirk that they have, a personality trait, an emotion, a reaction, anything. We just want to observe that thing and we want to underline it, point it out for that person, right? And then stack the case to prove out what they're doing, to make it true. So in the case that someone tells you, seems like you're like trying to pick your boogers when we're not looking. The best thing that you can do is immediately prove them right, is to add more facts that prove that the absurd thing that they pointed out, the odd thing, the quirk, the behavior that is unique to your character is in fact true. You want to stack the evidence in that favor. Yeah, that's framing. That's kind of finding the unusual thing, and whenever you find that unusual thing, just kind of pointing it out. We've really focused here on like a character. You can also frame things that are weird about the world. Frame things about like society at large. Yes, true. You're going to run into people. I mean, it's much harder to frame like the world is weird because we live in an invisible world, and it's hard to get the audience to imagine an odd thing like that happening. But so that's why we're kind of focusing on character game. It's the most common type of game, and I would say the other kinds of game that exist, you're probably going to do it in sketches, and they're just like a whole lot less common in an improv scene, unless there's like a ton of background work, and even then, it's like your team has to be doing like ensemble style improv for that kind of thing to happen. In any case, okay, so a couple examples. One example, and this is a sketch one of my friends wrote a while back, I really liked, and it was like people in like a support group, and this person was like, yeah, I was hitting rock bottom, and we were at dinner, and my mom had put out the honey baked ham, and another person in the group just goes like, oh, what kind of honey baked ham? And the framing moment, right? So we have a faithful scene, which is like someone saying like, here's when I hit rock bottom. Here's a difficult story about my past. I'm about to bare my soul to this group, right? So that would be like the first beat of a scene, which is like starting to tell a story. And we have our who, what, where, which is all normal. And we're playing it to faith, which is like, we have a group of people. Everyone's like, amen, brother, whatever. Someone asks, what kind of ham was it? And the framing move after that was, why are you stuck on the food? I'm about to bare my soul here. It seems like an odd thing to point out and focus in on. So now we have a little bit of framing, and the other person, right, can go like, oh yeah, it's not a weird amount of focus, just it's like honey glazed. Notice how I kind of said no for like a split second, but I really was saying yes, which is like, I'm hung up on the ham, right? Now what we need to do is like, we might play this out for a little bit. I don't remember what happens in the sketch. I just remember this premise I thought was like very funny and very goofy. But the next thing is, this person now is going to continue telling their story, right? With more heartbreaking detail and whatever else. So now the game that we have is like, either some version of like, I want to learn more about the ham, or what happened to the ham, or more questions about the food, or whether anybody was eating, or whether or not, hey, would Like, I know that was really difficult. Would you get a ham from Honey Baked Ham? Yeah, I've got a dinner plan this Saturday or whatever, right? Notice, right? Once we've kind of dealt with the weirdness of like, it seems like you're focused on this, like, hey, like, let's just go back to hearing your story, hearing your share. It sounds like you're going through a difficult time. We want to be here for you. Then we want to find somewhere else, right? He confesses a little bit more. He tells more of his story. It's heartbreaking. People are like, I've been there too, whatever. And we're going to hear again about hams, or we're going to get more food detail or whatever, right? That would be resting and trusting and finding an opportunity. Is like, we're just going to just keep being in a support group. We are going to do more support group things. We might take a 10-minute break. We might pass around the money bucket. We might, and here's the thing that's going to be kind of scary. You might like pass around the basket where people are trying to like give money to the group, right? And there might be 0 laughs. There might be 0 game moves. It might just be like putting money into the basket and like handing it over, and just even having an audience member watching a guy just kind of being like, sandwiches or ham sandwich. God, I could go for a ham sandwich later, right? Will produce its own kind of fun and laughter and moment. Another example of this is one of my own ideas. I never fully like put this one on stage, but like, a boy asking his girlfriend's father hand in marriage, blah blah blah, and instead of asking for a hand in marriage, he goes like, I want to ask for your permission to boink your daughter, which is, and then for the father to be like, to boink my daughter, you mean marry? Or another way of going about this, right, is like the father could agree with him, right, and be like, hey, I know most people don't like to use the word boink, but I think it's a lot more honest, and it's a friendlier word than what's really going to happen. And I think you're pretty brave for asking me for the opportunity to boink my daughter, right? It's basically what marriage is. It's the only thing that's, left behind, right? So in any case, this is another example where like the scene is, we're going to go through the beats. It's been really great knowing you. I dearly love your daughter. I know tradition is really important to you in this family. And I see myself having that your daughter is the love of my life. And I want to ask you for permission to boink your daughter. Right. So notice we went through the beats of like the setup of this whole thing, right? We know what's going to happen. This is a dad. This is me. The archetype is, I'm about to ask you this very important question that has to do with big religious tradition. And then there's going to be this odd moment. Instead of talking about marriage, I'm going to use the word boink. And we're going to frame that moment. That's an odd thing to say. We didn't even have to justify it. Right, which is one of the things that like I think people get a little bit militant about. Is like justification. It's like we can just both be like, we both agree, boink is better, right? And maybe like, yeah, I guess in the framing I was saying, yeah, I take back what I said. In the framing, right, I'm kind of going like, other people don't use, like try to use other euphemisms or whatever, but like we know what's really going on. You're gonna boink. So yeah, that would be a little bit of justification, but I will say that there are examples, and actually here's another example that has no justification in it, just to prove that what we're really doing is pointing out behavior and the fact that that behavior is going to continue. One of my favorite little bits that happens on Frasier is they point out in one of the episodes that Niles can't lie without his nose bleeding. There's no justification for it. There's no justification that explains why his nose bleeds whenever he lies. All that happens in the rest of the episode is like, there is a moment where it's clear that Niles has to lie. And instead of us watching him like successfully lie or evade the truth or whatever, he just starts bleeding from his nose and trying to hide his nose. And it's very funny, right? again, it's an observation, and the justification part is like, yeah, a little bit of extra, you can do it, right? You can do it, and it will give you probably an opportunity for other laughs or to get the audience a little bit more on board. So if it's not working with the audience for whatever reason, you can always try to throw in a justification. Sometimes the justification will give you some more juice. But other times it can be just as simple and just as silly as like he just gets a nosebleed. One more scene example, and then we're going to talk about warm-ups because I feel like this video is also going a little long. It is definitely going long. God damn it. Okay. Another example of this is like, one of my friends did this scene, and it's a couple, and they're like going to bed, very kind of typical scene, brushing his teeth, crawls into bed, and he puts on his like CPAP machine, but then he starts like choking, right? And he starts flailing about. And I think the line before is like, I got that big presentation tomorrow, so like you're gonna toss and turn, but try not to wake me up. And just watching this guy flail as he's trying to like not disturb his wife, but also keep the mask on, like take the mask off, and struggling with it. Produced laughs. It was very funny. It was very funny to watch, right? And there wasn't a super sharp justification. I guess there's kind of a subtle one or whatever, but in any case, whenever we're talking about framing, we can throw in a justification, but what we really want to do is give an accurate description of what we think is happening and maybe why, right? Justification, maybe why. To my earlier point, before we move on to some warm-up ideas, just because you describe what was happening and you justified it doesn't mean it's going to be funny. Doesn't mean you're going to instantly get laughs. And that's why we kind of do this in a very subtle way. If we get laughs from the audience, cool. If we don't get laughs from the audience, great. We're just going to keep moving through the scene, and maybe there'll be another unusual thing. You'll sometimes see like really, really seasoned improvisers frame it, and one of the players will like intentionally be like, you can kind of tell he or she kind of intentionally goes like, nah, and then just moves on. And they find another game later on. That's like, not every super seasoned team does that, but like some super seasoned teams, you can literally watch them actively be like, I don't want to play that game. Can we do something else on a very subtle level? And they do it that way. They just kind of go like, yep, and plow forward. Okay, warm-up ideas. Subway scenes. This is one of my favorite warm-ups, just to get it into your bones how game operates. How does this work? Or Chipotle scenes. I think let's call these Chipotle scenes. I prefer them as Chipotle scenes. Most everybody's been to a Chipotle. What happens in a Chipotle? You have beats of a scene. Hi, what are you looking for? Burrito bowl, whatever. Press the tortilla. Do you want rice and beans? What kind of rice and beans? What kind of rice and beans? What kind of protein do you want? Beef, chicken, pork, blah, blah, blah. Do you want cheese, pico, salsa, sour cream, guacamole, right? All the toppings. And at the very end, is it for here for to go or whatever? And then do you want chips, queso, cash register, goodbye. Okay? That is the archetype of a transaction scene, which is maybe one of the most boring scenes that you can do. But for the purposes of a warm-up, every scene is going to be a character going through the line at a Chipotle. Okay? And one person in the scene, your job is to move somebody down the line and get their burrito fixed with whatever you like. Okay? So one person is kind of the Chipotle worker. The other person in the scene, be a little freak, be a weirdo, talk about whatever you want, right? Stay focused as best as you possibly can, but be a big weirdo. I don't really care. Okay? And what we want to do is give a little bit of time for the freak to do their freaky thing and be weird. And then we want the base reality person to just be like, okay, cool. Beans and cheese, this. Okay, great. And then we want to watch the weird person be weird again. And then we just want to go back into, so steak, chicken. Great, steak and chicken. Want to see the weird person be weird again. Okay. So this will kind of work on the muscle of being in an archetypical scene and feeling out what it's like to have a little bit of give and take, to rest the game. And by resting it, we mean continue to move through the scene, and play the game. So here's how it might go. Someone shows up and just goes like, hi, would you like, what can I get you? Burrito or a bowl? And the person goes like, burrito. I'm going through a really, really tough time. I think I'm going to lose my house. I have a little bit of a gambling problem. Sometimes these parlays, they seem so good. And like one of them has to hit, right? And the other person goes like, yep. Oh man. Yeah, totally. I get that. Do you want refried pinto beans, black beans? What kind of rice? Okay. The other person just goes like, and it does add a little excitement, If I could just budget it to like $500,000 a week, I'd be okay. But I just can't, And again, the other person is going to do the next step in the Chipotle line. And at the very end, we're going to give that person their burrito and send them on their way. Okay? So that's how that's going to work. And truly, as the customer, go ham. Go crazy. Rely on the Chipotle person to reel you in whenever they get the chance. And so both players are going to have to be a little bit shameless. And both players are going to have to do a little bit of listening. Okay? Next layer here, next exercise we can do is we're all in a circle. And what we want to do is, I just call this hot take. And so what someone's going to do is, I want the first person to start out with like a little hot take, right? Like, I prefer Apple Music over Spotify or whatever. Okay. The next person is gonna take the lead, but I want everyone in the circle to kind of like join the next person. And I just want you to be like, that's normal, or that's just a difference of opinion, or that's strange. So we're going to start with like kind of normal. Then that person is going to give a hot take that they think is a little bit more spicy. It's a little hotter of a take. For example, like someone might be like, people who tell other people that they buy local are I think they're just virtuous. Like, I buy everything that's cheap. I think you're lame. The next person might go like, that's normal, or kind of difference of opinion. The next person in line will provide another hot take that might be a little bit, they don't have to be true or anything. They just have to be an opinion that slowly pushes the envelope a little bit more and a little bit more every single time. Okay. And eventually what we want to land on is, that's weird. That's weird. And once that person hears that that's weird, I want them to then double down and just go like, it's not weird, and then go a little bit further, right? It's not weird. It's actually normal. In fact, I do this so much that, or like I not only do this, but I defend it with my life. I want you to double down. And then I want the game to reset. So the next person will just be like, small hot take. I think Honeycrisp apples are like whatever. All right, and we're going to keep doing that. What this will do is start to give you a spider sense as to what is an absurd opinion, what is like, what is pretty far out without being like, we don't want to get extra weird. We don't want to be too bizarre. We kind of want to know where it is where we can start to break reality. And that will give us, I think, each person a sense of their own voice, because being like too bizarre isn't like intuitive for most folks. And I think that like being completely like like out of left field all the time ends up producing scenes where like bizarre things happen, but we don't have like a consistent like through line of the scene, because we're all like throwing very odd behavior. So that is the hot take exercise. The next thing, the last exercise, is we were going to talk about archetypical scenes. Archetypical scenes look like this. Everyone sits down. We get a suggestion. That suggestion makes us think of this archetypical scene, right? Maybe it's Jack and Rose, saying their final goodbye. Rose is on a plank of wood and Jack is about to sink or whatever. That's a scene we've all seen a bunch of times, so that's like in our cultural memory, and we're going to do that scene. Okay? And I would say the challenge is to try to play that scene as normally as possible for 2 minutes. And as the director or whoever the coach is, to kind of like play referee. Are you really trying to stay normal? Is that as normal as you can be? Every once in a while, someone will do something a little bit odd, but you can kind of see that they really did mean that thing, or that's really who they are. But we want to kind of play it out as real as possible and give it like a minute and a half to 2 minutes, and then someone can take a swing. I'm not saying that the swing will always work, but again, you're going to have to develop like a sense of what's going to be a really great game move, what's really going to get like a lot of laughs, and it's going to take a little bit of you finding your own voice, and that means taking a swing that doesn't always get a win, but gives you some feedback as to like what audience laugh about when you say it. In any case, that was today's video. I was really hoping that these were going to be a little bit shorter, but on the plus side, hopefully there'll be an hour's worth of lots of cool stuff that you learned or thought about that has to do with game as it comes when it comes to like first unusual thing and framing stuff. I think next week we'll probably talk about like incorrect reactions. But yeah, this will be the first series on game, or at least my take on game.